The stars outside the library sparkled like scattered diamonds. The library floated silently in the blackness of space, bigger than any city. Ships from countless worlds had traveled for hundreds of light years to reach it. Inside, every surface glowed with holograms, charts, and floating symbols. Alien scholars from many planets gathered, each one convinced they could solve the riddle that had baffled the galaxy for generations. The riddle was carved into a crystal that floated above a pedestal in the center of the chamber. It was older than any living species, and written in shapes that seemed impossible to understand. Every civilization had tried and failed. Some said it was a puzzle meant only for the ancient ones who had created it. Others believed it contained the secret to controlling the universe itself. Scholars argued loudly. A three-armed alien shook its tentacles. "You are reading it wrong. The sequence must be interpreted in 5 dimensions, not 4, it said, voice echoing through the chamber. "No," shouted a winged creature, feathers bristling. "It is a sound-based code. You are ignoring the vibrations hidden in the crystal." "They are both wrong," muttered a small amphibian being hopping on the floor. "You have to think like the ancients, not like yourself." The bickering went on for hours. Holograms flashed, lights moved, and data streams whirled around the chamber, but no one could solve it. Exhaustion and frustration hung in the air like smoke. The riddle remained silent and unyielding. In a quiet corner, away from the commotion, a small human child watched. The child was no taller than the pedestal itself and wore a simple gray tunic. His brown hair fell into his eyes as he stared at the crystal. He had come on a visiting ship with his parents, who were scholars themselves. But the child did not understand much of what the aliens were saying. He only liked looking at the lights, the symbols, and the strange shapes in the room. He walked slowly among the giants, listening. Some of them noticed him and frowned. One even tried to shoo him away with a long, slender finger. But the child did not mind. He crouched near the pedestal and stared at the crystal, tapping his fingers gently on the floor. "It looks funny," the child whispered to himself. "All these shapes and lines, and they act like a puzzle, but it's just a pattern." A group of aliens nearby laughed at him quietly. "Humans are so simple," one said. "They cannot understand a thing of value." The child did not answer. Instead, he tilted his head and studied the crystal. Then he noticed something. The shapes seemed to have pairs, like friends talking to each other. Some shapes repeated, like the rhythm of a story. He giggled softly. "It's like a joke," he murmured. "Excuse me," said a tall alien, leaning closer. "Did you just say joke?" The child nodded. "Yeah. Like the kind you tell when you knock on a door. Knock knock. Then someone answers. And then you say the funny part." He tapped his small hands on the floor in excitement. "Maybe it's not about being smart. Maybe it's about being silly." The aliens stopped. Their glowing eyes and multiple faces turned toward him. No one had ever spoken like this before. They whispered among themselves. How could a child suggest such a thing? Was he serious? Meanwhile, the child continued. "See, these shapes are like words in a joke. The answer is hidden, but not in a hard way. You just need to say it out loud, like when you laugh at a funny story." He clapped his hands. "I bet that's it." The room went silent. Every alien froze. The three-armed scholar approached him slowly, curiosity overcoming pride. "You think this riddle is a joke?" it asked. The child nodded, smiling. "Not a mean joke. A funny joke. Like knock knock and then you say who's there and then it's the answer. The riddle is just waiting for someone to laugh at it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then a few of the younger aliens began to murmur, questioning their own complicated solutions. Could it really be this simple? Could the answer really be laughter? The child clapped again. "Yes, that's it. You don't have to twist your brains into knots. You just have to see it like a game." The head scholar, a massive being with crystal eyes, lowered its head. It studied the child carefully. Perhaps we have been overthinking. Perhaps simplicity is a form of intelligence we do not understand." The child smiled wider. "I can show you. I can tell you how it works." Excitement rippled through the chamber. The aliens had never seen anyone approach the riddle like this. Even the oldest, wisest scholars leaned in to listen. The child's small voice carried through the room, playful but confident. He began to explain the riddle as if he were telling a story to friends, moving his hands and giggling at the punchline. For the first time in 1,000 years, the crystal seemed to shimmer differently, as if it recognized the child's laughter. The aliens watched in awe. They had expected a complex solution requiring decades of study, not the simple words of a human child. And in that moment, the galaxy realized something. Intelligence was not just about knowledge, speed, or experience. Sometimes, it was about seeing the world in a way no one else could, about finding joy and simplicity in the impossible. The child did not know it yet, but he had just taken the first step toward solving the greatest riddle the galaxy had ever known. The library was quieter now, but the air still buzzed with tension. Scholars whispered to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief. How could a small human child, barely taller than a table, have noticed what they had all missed for generations? Some refused to believe it, thinking the child's words were nonsense. Yet curiosity drew them closer. The child bounced on the tips of his toes, eyes wide, staring at the crystal floating above the pedestal. Shapes glimmered and shifted slowly. He leaned forward and poked at the air, tracing invisible lines with his fingers. "See? It's like a story," he said, his voice soft but full of excitement. "Every shape is part of the joke. You just have to say it out loud." A tall alien with silver skin and long flowing tentacles lowered itself to the floor to watch. "Say it out loud? Do you mean, speak the answer?" it asked, its voice like wind chimes. The child nodded quickly. "Yes. You can't just stare at it. You have to tell it. Like when you play a game. Knock knock. Who's there?" And then, the answer. He laughed, clapping his hands. "It's so simple." Some of the other scholars snorted. "Ridiculous," one said. Its green scales shimmered. A child cannot solve what generations of thinkers could not. But a few others, younger aliens with curious eyes, leaned closer. They had spent centuries trying to interpret the riddle using their most advanced technology. Yet here was a child using only imagination and laughter. Their curiosity overpowered their pride. They moved closer, hovering in a semicircle around the pedestal. The child noticed them and smiled. "Do you want to try with me?" he asked. He jumped up and down a little, pointing to the shapes. "I can show you how it works. Watch." He spoke slowly, emphasizing every word. "Knock, knock." He paused. "Who's there?" He turned to the crystal. "See? That's the first step. You ask, you listen, and then, you answer. The shapes are the words, not puzzles you have to solve with your brains." The silver-skinned alien tilted its head. "This is unconventional. But somehow, it feels correct. Perhaps we have been overthinking." The child giggled. "I told you. You just have to play with it. Don't try to be too smart. You can't trick the joke. It has to make you laugh." He bounced excitedly. Laughter is the key. Nearby, an amphibian scholar with webbed feet and shiny eyes croaked softly. Could it be that simple? Could the ancients be teaching humor? "Yes," the child said. "Exactly. Humor is smart. It's not about being big or strong or knowing all the rules. It's about seeing the funny part and enjoying it." The chamber grew quiet. Aliens who had argued for hours now watched a human child with a mix of amazement and confusion. They had spent decades decoding the riddle with advanced machines, quantum processors, and ancient logic, yet none of that had worked. Now all it took was a child's laughter. The child clapped his hands and spun in a circle. "You try. You ask the riddle like a joke. I'll show you the answer." The younger aliens hesitated, then mimicked his actions. They said, "Knock, knock," their voices strange and melodic. The child bounced beside them, nodding eagerly. "Who's there?" they asked in unison. The shapes on the crystal seemed to shimmer slightly, like they were listening. "Yes. That's it," the child cheered. "Now say the answer. Say it loud." A tiny alien with sparkling wings stepped forward and hesitated. Then it said the answer, the simplest thing it could think of. A bright light flashed across the crystal. The shapes shimmered and shifted. The riddle hummed softly, almost like it was alive. The alien blinked in surprise. "It responded?" "Yes," the child shouted, jumping up and down. "It wants you to play. You don't need to be a genius. You just have to enjoy it." Some of the older scholars muttered angrily. "This is foolishness. We risk insulting the ancients by treating their riddle like a game." But others could not resist the simple joy. They tried again, each adding their own little twist, laughing as they spoke. The crystal glimmered brighter with every correct approach. Slowly, the chamber filled with laughter, a sound that no alien had expected to hear in a place of study. The child grinned, spinning around. "See? You don't have to be perfect. You just have to have fun. The riddle is not a test of strength or knowledge. It's a test of heart. If you can laugh, you can solve it." Even the skeptical ones began to soften. They watched as the child hopped from one alien to another, guiding them, teaching them to speak the riddle like a joke. For the first time, the library was not tense and quiet. It was alive with playfulness, curiosity, and wonder. And as the crystal hovered above the pedestal, its shapes glowing brighter than ever, it seemed to recognize something. Not the strength of their minds or the complexity of their technology, but the simple human joy of seeing the world in a new way. The child had no idea that he was changing the course of the galaxy's understanding of intelligence. All he knew was that he was having fun. And sometimes, that was all it took to do something extraordinary. The chamber was silent now, but the tension had grown even stronger. Aliens of all shapes and sizes hovered near the pedestal, their eyes fixed on the floating crystal. For centuries, this riddle had defeated the galaxy's greatest minds. It had been studied, analyzed, and debated by every species capable of intelligent thought. And yet, the answer had remained hidden. The child stood in the center, small and unassuming, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. He had been watching, listening, and thinking in a way no one else had. The alien scholars whispered to each other, confused and frustrated, unable to believe that such a small human could even understand what they had spent lifetimes trying to solve. The child tapped the pedestal lightly. "It's easy," he said softly. "You just have to say it out loud. Like a game. Like a joke." A three-armed scholar, whose eyes glowed like molten gold, frowned. "A joke? You speak as if this riddle is child's play." "Yes," the child exclaimed. "It is. You're all making it too hard. You are using big words and machines, but you don't need them. You just need to listen and laugh a little." The crystal shimmered faintly as if responding to his words. The aliens leaned closer, unable to resist the child's charm and curiosity. Even the oldest scholars, who had seen the rise and fall of empires, were drawn to the simplicity of the child's approach. "Explain," said a tall alien with silver feathers that glimmered in the light. "Explain how you think this riddle can be solved with laughter." The child bounced on his toes, hands waving excitedly. "Okay, watch. You say, 'Knock, knock,' and then the riddle answers, 'Who's there?' And then you tell the answer. That's all. You don't have to be clever or strong or know every rule. You just play with it." The amphibian scholar croaked softly. Could it be that the ancients wanted humor? That the riddle is a test of playfulness, not intelligence? "Yes," the child shouted. "Exactly. That's it. You have to see it like a story, like a game. The riddle wants someone to laugh." The three-armed scholar shook its tentacles in disbelief. "Preposterous. A child, an insignificant human, claims to know the secret that eluded every species for millennia." The child stepped closer to the crystal. "I'm not claiming anything. I just know it's fun. You can't trick a joke. You have to enjoy it or it won't work." He laughed, small and bright, a sound so pure it seemed to fill the chamber. The crystal pulsed softly. The symbols shimmered as if they were listening. Some of the younger scholars tried to mimic the child. They said slowly, "Knock, knock." The child grinned and nodded. "Yes. Now ask, 'Who's there?'" "Who's there?" they said, uncertain but curious. "Good," the child cheered. "Now give the answer. Say it like it's the end of the story, the funny part." A tiny alien with sparkling wings whispered the answer carefully. The crystal flashed brightly, bathing the chamber in soft golden light. The shapes shifted and moved, forming patterns that had never been seen before. The riddle responded and the room vibrated with energy. The older scholars gasped. It moved," one said. "The riddle, it is responding to a child?" "Yes," the child laughed. "It wants you to play. You don't have to know everything. You just have to have fun." For a moment, the chamber was silent again, but this time it was filled with awe, not tension. Every alien present felt something new, an understanding that intelligence was not just logic or memory but perspective and creativity. The child continued to explain, demonstrating the joke again and again, his small voice carrying through the massive chamber. He showed them how to follow the shapes, how to speak with joy, and how to let the riddle guide them instead of the other way around. Even the skeptics began to watch carefully. Some tried to hide their smiles, but they could not resist. The crystal pulsed with light, brighter with every laugh, every correct step, every playful word. Finally, the head scholar, a massive being with eyes like liquid crystal, stepped forward. It studied the child for a long time, silent. Then it spoke, its voice echoing through the chamber. "Perhaps we have misunderstood intelligence. Perhaps it is not measured only by knowledge or power, but by the ability to see the world differently. To find joy where others see difficulty." The child's eyes widened. "Yes, that's it. You get it." A ripple of laughter spread through the younger scholars, then the older ones reluctantly joined. The chamber, once tense and serious, now felt alive. The crystal shimmered, almost as if it recognized the child's simple wisdom. In that moment, the galaxy realized something extraordinary. A human child, small and seemingly ordinary, had taken the first step in solving the riddle that had defeated civilizations for centuries. Not by technology, not by brute force, and not by ancient knowledge, but by imagination, playfulness, and the courage to see the world in a new way. The child looked around at the amazed faces, feeling a quiet pride. He did not fully understand the importance yet, but he knew that he had done something special. And in the chamber filled with stars, laughter, and glowing symbols, he knew that this was only the beginning of an adventure that would change the galaxy forever. News of the child's breakthrough spread faster than any ship could travel. Hollow communicators buzzed across the galaxy, from the glittering cities of the Avorians to the crystal towers of the Xiphorians. Every intelligent species had heard that a human child had solved the ancient riddle that had stumped them for millennia. Some could hardly believe it. Others were curious. On the planet Valora, a council of alien scholars gathered in a dome made of transparent metal. They displayed the riddle's hologram and replayed the recordings of the child explaining the solution. "It cannot be," said a tall, blue-scaled elder. "We spent centuries decoding the crystal with our most advanced machines. And a human, a child, solved it with laughter." "Yes," replied a younger scholar. The crystal responded. It shimmered with light and seemed happy. "This is not a trick. It is real." Far across the galaxy, ships carrying news to distant colonies lit up the skies. Some species were skeptical, but many were intrigued. They sent emissaries to see the child and learn this new human approach to the impossible. The story of the riddle was no longer just a legend, it had become a lesson in perspective. Back in the floating library, the child stood on a small platform, smiling at the gathered aliens. They were of all shapes and sizes, winged, scaled, tentacled, even beings made mostly of energy. All of them had once scoffed at his size and youth, but now they listened with respect. "You see," the child said, hopping from foot to foot, "the riddle isn't about being the smartest. It's about seeing it differently. You don't have to twist your brains into knots. You just have to enjoy it like a game." Some of the older scholars muttered to each other. Pride made it hard to accept that a small human could teach them anything. One elder with shimmering purple skin whispered, "This is absurd. How can a child, who barely knows our languages, understand what we cannot?" The child tilted his head and grinned. "You don't have to know everything. You just have to play. The riddle is like a story, like a joke. It wants you to laugh. And when you laugh, it tells you the answer." One by one, the scholars began to try again. They followed the child's instructions, saying the riddle aloud like a knock-knock joke. The crystal pulsed and shimmered with every attempt. Laughter filled the chamber, bright and warm. Even the skeptical ones could not hide their smiles. "You were right," said a winged alien whose feathers glowed gold. "It does respond to playfulness. We were too serious, too proud, too focused on knowledge alone." The child clapped his hands. "See, that's why humans can be funny and smart at the same time. We see things differently. And sometimes that's what it takes to solve big problems." Across the galaxy, the lesson spread. Human ships were invited to participate in councils, not because of technology or power, but because humans had a unique way of thinking. Their creativity, imagination, and humor became highly valued. Scholars from other worlds traveled to study humans, hoping to understand this strange mix of simplicity and brilliance. Some species were still resistant. "A child's approach cannot be trusted for serious matters," argued a crystalline being on the planet Yalara. "We risk chaos if we rely on amusement rather than calculation." But even they could not ignore the results. The crystal's glow and the laughter of the child had proven that intelligence was more than knowledge. Perspective, creativity, and joy were equally important. Slowly, the galaxy began to embrace the lesson. Sometimes the most ordinary beings could achieve extraordinary things. The child watched as the alien scholars worked together, laughing and learning. He did not feel proud or superior. He only felt happy that they were enjoying the puzzle. For him, the riddle had always been a game, and sharing the game with others was the best part. On the distant moons of Cerealia, human scientists smiled at the news reports. Their species had always been curious, playful, and persistent. And now the galaxy was beginning to understand why those qualities mattered. Not just strength, speed, or technology, but imagination and joy, the things humans sometimes took for granted. Even the child's parents, who had once worried that their son was too small or too mischievous, now looked on with amazement. Their child had changed the galaxy, not through power or knowledge but through laughter and perspective. The child stood on the platform and looked at the crowd. "You see," he said, "everyone is smart in different ways. You don't have to be like everyone else to do something great. You just have to use what makes you special." The scholars nodded slowly, understanding sinking in. Some laughed out loud, unable to resist the joy of the lesson. Others remained quiet, thoughtful, realizing that their pride had almost blinded them to a simple truth. Intelligence was not just about facts or memory, but about creativity, perspective, and courage. By the end of the day, the floating library was alive with energy. Aliens discussed, experimented, and laughed together, learning from the human child. Across the galaxy, word spread that humans brought more than technology. They brought imagination, creativity, and a joy for life that no machine or calculation could replicate. And in that moment, the child understood something important. Humans had always been underestimated. Small, simple, and often playful, they could still achieve great things. The riddle had taught the galaxy many lessons, but the most important one was clear. Intelligence alone was not enough. Perspective, creativity, and the courage to see the world differently could change everything. And the child, smiling brightly, had just proven it. The galaxy had changed. Ships from distant planets carried news of the human child who had solved the ancient riddle, and the story spread faster than light. Across star systems, scholars, leaders, and explorers spoke of the child's wisdom, not because of power, strength, or technology, but because of imagination, humor, and perspective. The floating library, once silent and tense, now buzzed with life. Aliens of every species gathered to see the child again. They wanted to learn how humans thought, how a small, ordinary being could do what the galaxy's greatest minds could not. The child, who had always been curious and playful, now stood at the center of attention, smiling shyly but confidently. "You see," the child said, spinning around, "you don't have to be the biggest, the strongest, or the smartest to do something great. You just have to use what makes you special. And sometimes that's imagination and joy." The crowd of scholars and emissaries leaned in, listening. Even the skeptics, who had doubted him at first, could not hide their amazement. The crystal above the pedestal glowed warmly, as if acknowledging the child's words. It had remained mysterious for thousands of years, but now it seemed happy, content, and alive. Aliens who had once scoffed at humans now asked questions. "How do you think of things so differently?" asked a winged being with glowing feathers. "How can you see answers in laughter when we see only complexity?" The child shrugged and grinned. "I don't know. We just do. Humans like to play, tell stories, and make jokes. Sometimes that helps us see things clearly. Things that others miss when they try too hard." News reached the governments and councils of distant star systems. Humans were invited to interstellar meetings not because of military might or technology, but because of creativity, humor, and perspective. They were asked to share ideas, give advice, and teach others how to see the world differently. The galaxy began to realize that humans were not ordinary at all. They were extraordinary in their way. On a planet with cities of glass towers, a council of alien leaders discussed the news. "Perhaps we have underestimated humans," said a tall being with crystalline skin. "They have shown us that intelligence is more than knowledge. Perspective and creativity matter. And sometimes, playfulness can solve what centuries of study cannot." The child's parents, who had accompanied him from Earth, looked on with pride. They had always known that humans were curious and persistent, but even they had not expected that their child would change the way the galaxy thought. The child did not feel proud or boastful. He only felt happy that others were discovering the joy he had always known, the joy of imagination, laughter, and simple play. Across the stars, human ships were now welcomed on distant worlds. Scholars and leaders sought to learn from them. Humans taught them games, jokes, and stories. They shared ideas in ways no machine or algorithm could replicate. The galaxy began to see that humans brought more than strength or tools. They brought creativity, perspective, and a spark that inspired others to think differently. Even the oldest, most skeptical scholars began to change. They watched as humans approached problems with simplicity and clarity. They laughed at human jokes, shared ideas in new ways, and began to understand that sometimes, the solution to a complex problem could be simple if one dared to see it differently. The child, though small, had sparked a change that would last generations. He had shown that intelligence was not only about memory, speed, or computation. It was about creativity, imagination, humor, and the courage to see the world from a new angle. The riddle had been a test, not of strength, but of heart. And the human child had passed it brilliantly. One day the child stood once more at the pedestal, looking at the crystal. "I wonder," he said softly, "what other riddles are out there?" He tapped the air lightly, smiling. Maybe some are just waiting for someone to play with them. Maybe some just need a laugh. The aliens around him laughed too, realizing that the child's small voice carried wisdom far greater than they had imagined. The galaxy had learned something important. Humans were special not because of their power but because of the way they saw the world. They could solve the impossible not through brute force or knowledge, but through imagination, creativity, and joy. And so, humans became known across the stars. They were invited to councils, asked for advice, and respected for their unique perspective. Their laughter, playfulness, and creativity became symbols of hope and possibility. The galaxy realized that even the smallest beings could achieve greatness, and that sometimes, the key to the universe was simply seeing it differently. The child looked up at the stars, his eyes sparkling. "There's so much more to discover," he said. "And maybe, just maybe, humans will keep showing the galaxy how to see the fun in everything, even the impossible." And with that, the floating library hummed softly, the crystal pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The galaxy, for the first time, understood that humans were not just part of the universe, they were a spark that could light even the darkest, most mysterious corners of space. The child laughed, small and bright, and the stars seemed to shine a little brighter.